Ricardo Montalban, Leonard Nimoy, and William Shatner, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
You know, I've always loved Dairy Queen hot dogs, ever since I was back in Philly. And now you can get the DQ Hounder in a Basket, a plump, juicy quarter-pound hot dog with fries. Top one off just the way you like it. Find out why nobody sells more hot dogs than Dairy Queen, an American original.
The DQ Hounder Basket deal with soft drink, now at $1.69.
These news headlines are brought to you by WGXA TV, the spirit of Georgia.
Good evening. Tonight, coming up on the News 24 Late Report at 11 o'clock, we'll have the latest on the campaigning for the Jones County 1% local option sales tax. Teresa Morgan's in Jones County, and we'll have the latest up there. Also, the Iowa Caucus is making news here in the mid-state. Wesleyan College having an election on their favorite candidates in that race. Also, the Dodge Correctional Institute in Chester using innovative ways to help people go straight.
For all your news, turn to Ron Wildman and Melody Hutchings, weeknights at 5:30 and 11 on the News 24 Early and Late Reports, Middle Georgia's news leader.
This is an ABC News special.
In Iowa tonight, thousands of people stood up and were counted. In schools, in living rooms, in the firehouse, and on the farm. What they are doing is sending the rest of the nation the first real political message of the 1988 campaign. Who won? Who lost? What does it mean to the 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans running for their party's presidential nomination?
From ABC News, this is the 88 vote. Tonight, round 1, Iowa. Now reporting from the Iowa State Capitol in Des Moines, Peter Jennings and David Brinkley.
Good evening and welcome to the center of the political universe for one more night. All across Iowa tonight, voters are finally having their say. After months of talk from the candidates and the media, the first challenge for Republican and Democratic presidential hopefuls involving real people. With me, as always, to join us on this and every other night through the political year, David Brinkley. David?
It's been an even more interesting day than we expected. There have been surprises. We will bring you the whole details now that it's all, whatever has been done has been done. The last promise made, the last hand shaken, the last pig patted, and the last pancake breakfast. Now it is all in the computer, and we'll bring it to you.
And standing by on the other side of Des Moines to talk to us on this first night is the big story, Pat Robertson. But before we talk to him, let us look at what the results are. And let's start with the Democrats. The Democrats vote in 2 waves in their caucuses. And what we're going to look at first here is the projection of the winners, the ABC projections, based on the first round of 2 rounds of actual voting in the Democratic caucuses. We are projecting that Richard Gebhard, the congressman from Missouri, is going to win, that Paul Simon, the senator from Illinois, is going to come in second, and Michael Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, is going to come in third. And that Jesse Jackson, increasing his vote almost 4-fold since 1980 here, is going to come in next. And then uncommitted, remember back in 1976, uncommitted actually beat Jimmy Carter. And then at the bottom of that list, almost at the bottom of that list, I should say, Bruce Babbitt, 6%, whose campaign never took off. And Gary Hart, there's the political story in many ways of 1987, who gets 820 votes so far, with 62% of the Iowa precincts reporting. That's in the first wave of the voting in the Democratic caucuses. If you don't get 15% in the first wave, then there's a lot of coalition building, and there's some negotiating, perhaps shifting weight to other candidates. But we see no indication at this moment that in the second wave it is going to change. Excuse me. Let's have a look at the projections on the Republican side. And here, of course, is largely the big story of the night. We are projecting on the basis of a straw poll or a secret ballot, which the Republicans take at the beginning of their caucuses, and with 93% of the caucuses around the state reporting in, that Robert Dole, the senator from Kansas, is going to win. Pat Robertson is going to come in second with 24% of the vote. And George Bush, who won back here in 1980 and had an incredibly strong state organization for a long period of time, has taken a very severe blow and come in third. Let's look at Jack Kemp in fourth and Pete DuPont in the next position. And now, standing by at his headquarters in Des Moines, is the Reverend Pat Robertson, who, as we said, is the story this evening. No one seemed to be able to predict, Mr. Robertson, how you were going to win, though you've been the story for 24 hours. How did you do it?
Peter, we reached out to a broad coalition of people. People were wondering if I could broaden my base. The answer was yes. We brought in people who were traditional Democrats, blue-collar Democrats, Roman Catholics, farmers, students, housewives, but people who were unified around one theme, that we wanted to restore the greatness of America through moral strength. These are people who said, let's make America #1, and we want somebody who isn't a politician to do it.
You have, I think it's fair to say, scared the living daylights out of the Republican establishment here in the last 48 hours. Do you feel good about that?
Well, I don't feel good about scaring anybody, but the truth is, when we had that big win in Hawaii on Thursday, I took 82% of the total vote, and Bob Dole got 9%, George Bush got 9%, and coming into here, it was much the same thing. I've seen wonderful support. It's humbling to me to see that kind of support, but I believe after this win in Iowa, I'm going to be coalescing the conservatives. Many of the Reagan supporters around the country will be coming over to my campaign, and I think that among the staunch supporters, they will be given hard. It'll be like I had a rocket strapped to my back now, and I should be taking off very substantially.
Well, if you do that, if you do that, we certainly would like to see it. We'd like to have pictures of it, Mr. Robertson. Now,
I'll do it, David.
All right. Iowa is Iowa, and New Hampshire is quite different. Do you have an invisible army in New Hampshire that will march out on primary day and give you a lot of votes?
Our staff up there indicates that I'm beginning to see a tremendous moving. They think I'm now in 3rd place. So again, the battle up in New Hampshire is going to be for 2nd place. And I've got a good army. I don't know how invisible it is, but I'm picking up a lot of conservatives. It'll be very visible now, but the conservatives in New Hampshire, it's a little different tenor, but they like my message. I speak right down the line on the issues. I'm going to be addressing the New Hampshire legislature in a joint session on Thursday, and I'll outline some things I hope will win me some friends up there.
Mr. Robertson, just before I ask you this last question, let me make a point. You're said to be much stronger in caucus states, and a number of the Republican officials in the party are very concerned that you might at some point not support the nominee of the Republican Party, come what may. Will you support the Republican nominee if it is not you?
Well, I'm not letting thoughts like that come into my mind. In a sense, I'm going to be the nominee, and I think this win is establishing me as the new potential winner. But I'm throwing the gauntlet down to George Bush in South Carolina. That's going to be the big primary in a southern state where we'll go head-to-head. And I frankly think the race there will be between me and George Bush, and I expect to beat him. And with that, I will certainly be a team player. I'm going to be a Republican who will broaden the base and enlarge the party.
Okay, Mr. Robertson, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
One of the things we will try to establish a little later on this evening as we listen to Lynn Scherr, who puts all of our numbers together for us and explains what they mean, is whether or not Mr. Robertson has tonight, in fact, broadened his base beyond the conservative or economic right, which has been appealing to him throughout this particular campaign. We will also be coming back to talk to the winner. Remember, Mr. Robertson came in second, Senator Dole, in just a minute.
Live from Des Moines, Iowa, this is ABC News coverage of the 88 vote. Brought to you tonight by Citicorp.
Because Citicorp understands the drive to succeed, to do more than just get by, we've become the nation's largest financial services company, already helping 1 in every 5 American families, with more student loans, more home mortgages, more MasterCard and Visa cards than any other company. Citicorp and Citibank, we'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive. Jeep designed Cherokee to give you more than any other vehicle of its kind. Like a choice of 2 or 4 doors and room for 5 adults. And now you can get Cherokee with an optional 4-liter 6-cylinder engine that has more power, a lot more power, than anything in its class. All of this is precisely why Four Wheel and Off-Road Magazine named Jeep Cherokee 4x4 of the Year for the second time.
Save up to $1,800 on selected Jeep vehicles, America's winners.
Just make a couple of observations. Pat Robertson there was talking about the turnout and what he thinks he has got. In fact, there was a big increase in turnout for the Democrats since 1984, and David, a considerable increase among Republicans, though not as big as it was for Democrats.
Well, all of this is a bit deja vu. You know, he's running against Washington. He's running against the bureaucrats. Jimmy Carter ran against Washington and the bureaucrats. Ronald Reagan ran against Washington and the bureaucrats. Now, Robertson, he hasn't won yet, but he's doing better than we expected.
I must say, I was over at his campaign headquarters the other night, and there was sort of a glint in the eye, though they wouldn't tell us much about how well organized he was. But I can tell you this, that in the eastern part of the state, they brought in babysitters from Illinois so that people could get out and attend the caucuses. And before the caucus tonight, they held potluck dinners all over the country so they could have an early assessment of just how well they were going to do in these caucuses. Let us go to New York now, where our Dean of Numerology, Lynn Scher, stands by with the assessment of what the numbers mean, and whether or not, perhaps you can tell us, Lynn, whether or not Mr. Robertson is correct in his assessment of touching into the mainstream of Republican voters.
Well, Peter, I'll tell you about Reverend Robertson in just a moment. Let me start with Senator Dole. His sweeping victory in Iowa tonight is due largely to his strength in farm and rural areas of the state. And that's according to interviews with 3,500 Republican voters as they entered their caucuses. But if we look at the way voters in the cities and suburbs cast their ballots, then we can see the real story tonight, why Pat Robertson did so well. According to our poll, Dole took 31% of the city vote, but Robertson came out nearly equal with 28%. And that cut very deeply into George Bush's support. He got only 16% of the city and suburban vote. And incidentally, that is just half of what Vice President Bush received in the cities the last time he ran in an Iowa caucus, which was 1980. And that despite what was considered a strong organization there. But when you look at Pat Robertson's strengths tonight, it's clear that the big city vote was only one factor. Half of Robertson's support came from those farm and rural areas, and the rest came from the cities and the smaller towns. So Pat Robertson is looking good across Iowa tonight, apparently taking votes away from George Bush's presumed strongholds. But if we can look ahead to New Hampshire, the next step, despite what he said, Robertson does not appear to have clear sailing. Our latest poll there shows that he is way behind Bush and Dole, and he has the highest negative rating in New Hampshire. More than a third of the people we talked to said they would not vote for Pat Robertson. Peter?
Thanks, Lynn, very much. I'm also reminded that about a year ago in this state, Pat Robertson said he could turn out 70,000 people. Then he scaled it back to about 40,000 people, David. And then a short while ago, they began to hide the ball. There's a real organizational thing there which nobody else in the more established Republican Party can get their hands on. Quite fascinating.
Well, they seem to be his people there. You know, in his political rallies, the audience reaction was as if in a church. They kept saying, amen, hallelujah, though he was talking politics. So no one, I don't think anyone else can do that.
He also continues to try to divest himself of that reverend thing. His campaign staff likes to refer to him no longer as a Christian broadcaster, but a Christian businessman, which I find very interesting. Now, let us point out again that Mr. Robertson did come in second in this, and Mr. Bush did come in third. The man who came in first was, at least over the last few weeks, widely expected to do so. He's the one-of-us candidate out here, the Midwesterner, Senator Robert Dole from Kansas, and just a couple of minutes ago, before the broadcast, we talked to him.
Well, we don't know. We'll be there tomorrow. I'll be speaking to the legislature at 1 o'clock, again, trying to deliver my message, which is dealing with the deficit, dealing with the Soviet Union. We think the message paid off in Iowa. Just have to wait and see, but we're ready to go to work.
You begin moving up in the polls in New Hampshire already. Is there some thought in your own mind you can actually beat George Bush in New Hampshire?
Well, we thought about that, but again, that's going to be determined by the voters. We had a lot of confidence in the Iowa voters. They looked at us pretty carefully. They do the same in New Hampshire, and they've been looking for a long time. I think there's a big pool of undecided voters in that state, and hopefully they'll take a good hard look at Bob Dole.
Senator, what do you make of Pat Robertson's very strong showing, coming in second?
Well, I think it did surprise me. I must say our tracking was Dole versus Bush. Our numbers are about what we predicted, what we felt might happen, but the Robertson numbers were obviously... we didn't measure those. We knew they were higher than other polls had indicated, but it's a remarkable showing by Pat Robertson. It means there are a lot of people out there that might become Republicans.
Well, then it's showing less than expected for Vice President Bush, wouldn't you say?
I would say so. I mean, it seems to me when the Vice President did very well here in 80, 30-some% of the vote left this state thinking he might go all the way. I don't know what happened, but it's been a good, hard race. But I do believe that the Iowa voters, just as New Hampshire voters, want us to be more specific. They want to know what Bob Dole's going to do. Bob Dole might get elected. Bob Dole may have to deal with the Soviets. He has to deal with a deficit. So we've been trying to make that clear as we travel around. We think it's paid off.
Senator, I think everyone assumes that you and Vice President Bush are going to go on sniping at each other in some personal level. Do you think that hurt the Vice President here?
I don't know, but you're not going to find Bob Dole doing it. I don't believe in personal attacks, and I'm going to try to stick with the issues, stick with our game plan. Now, if somebody attacks my wife, I might raise my voice, but otherwise, I'm going to stay right out there on the issues.
And let's look a little past New Hampshire. How well do you think you are organized in the South, and therefore how well positioned in the South?
We're really quite well organized. I think people have been looking at the numbers, and it's been 2-to-1. Bob Dole second, Bush first. We come back after New Hampshire. Remember, we come back to the Midwest again, back to South Dakota, back to Minnesota, then Wyoming, then Kansas, then South Carolina, Vermont. So there's still a number of states before Super Tuesday. Now, if we can continue talking issues and do well in those states, I think we might do well in the South.
Oh, we know you're planning your campaign and not Vice President Bush's campaign, but
right.
from your best judgment, what does he have to do now to recover?
I really don't know. I mean, I think that's going to be a big, you know, I bet they're meeting right now in New Hampshire. I don't know what they do to recover. Maybe it's just a temporary problem. Maybe Iowa was never going to be a Bush state. But I assume they're looking at all the options. While they're doing that, we're working on our speech tomorrow to the state legislature.
Senator, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just before we continue this, a couple of observations. Our broadcast tonight is really split in two parts. The Republican part now, and then the Democratic part a little later on, because the Democratic caucuses, which are much more complicated than the Republican ones, are still going on. And though we're able to project Richard Gebhardt as going to be the winner based on the first of two waves of votings that the Democrats in the caucuses indulge in, the Democratic story is not yet fully unfolding here. And one more observation for those of you who don't watch the caucuses in Iowa quite as fervently as some. We know this is not the most typical state in the Union. It is 29th in size. It is very white. It is more liberal on many issues than other states. Very white, that is to say, virtually no blacks or Hispanics, and rather older than most states, but close to the national average in income and with a very healthy two-party system. And it has enough quirks to make the campaign interesting for all of us. So we're glad you could join us. We'll be back in a minute to talk about, though not to, George Bush.
ABC's Olympic Diary is brought to you by Jeep.
Sixten Jernberg of Sweden is the greatest cross-country skier in Olympic history, perhaps the greatest Winter Olympic athlete of all time. Over the course of 3 Olympiads, he won 4 gold, 3 silver, and 2 bronze medals, more than any other Winter Olympian. More perhaps than anyone will again.
Jeep designed Cherokee to give you more than any other vehicle of its kind, like a choice of 2 or 4 doors and room for 5 adults. And now you can get Cherokee with an optional 4-liter 6-cylinder engine that has more power, a lot more power, than anything in its class. All of this is precisely why 4-Wheel and Off-Road magazine named Jeep Cherokee 4x4 of the year for the 2nd time.
Save up to $1,800 on selected Jeep vehicles, America's winners.
Sixten Jernberg lives now in Lima, Sweden, where he runs a sport village he built himself.
More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source. And Ted Koppel is one of the reasons why. The exclusive insight, probing questions, and recognized authority.
Expect us to report the events that touch your life in the way they really happen.
Expect the world of ABC News.
The 88 vote, the Iowa caucuses, will continue in a moment.
I can't marry you.
Why?
I'm only 6 years younger.
Oh, I don't care about that.
What do you care about? My hair? My tie?
Your breakfast.
This?
Yeah, it's old-fashioned.
Hey, I'm an old guy.
All those years of sugar and preservatives.
You're right.
Nutri-Grain whole wheat flakes. No sugar added, no preservatives.
That's good. Now will you marry me?
I thought you were 5 years younger.
Dedicated to the ones we love.
Let's hook up our phones, computers, messaging, the works through here.
We can't. Our phone systems down south are 3 years older than the new one here. Same make, different technology.
You bought us a $2 million phone system that doesn't work with anything else?
Just to emphasize before we continue, this is not the end. This is only the beginning. David.
Well, where are we going first? We're going to Carol Simpson?
New Hampshire.
All right, Carol Simpson has been following the Bush campaign all along, and they cannot be having the best time, the happiest time of anybody in Iowa. It may be the worst. Carol, what is it like over there?
Very depressing, David. We campaigned in 4 Iowa cities early today, and we could tell that something was wrong, that the Bush campaign had an indication that they were in big trouble, and they began preparing for a third-place finish. But I don't think anyone was prepared for the very poor third-place finish that Vice President Bush got. He spent 38 days in the state campaigning, which is 8 more than he spent in 1980 when he won the Iowa caucuses. He spent $700,000. He had what was reputed to be one of the best organizations in Iowa, and yet this poor finish. He went up to his hotel suite here in Nashua, New Hampshire, when we returned here, and he came down and talked to reporters and said that he was disappointed but not discouraged, and he offered his congratulations to Pat Robertson and to Bob Dole, promising that he would win in New Hampshire next Tuesday.
Okay, Carol, thanks very much. No gain for the Vice President, obviously, in coming out and answering reporters' questions this evening. Joining us here in Des Moines, one of our reporters, ABC News' Jeff Greenfield, and the man who was the campaign manager for Walter Mondale in the last campaign, Bob Beckel. We've asked them to play a sort of role this evening. Jeff, I'd like you to play the campaign manager, which you were before you became a journalist. And Bob, you play Vice President Bush, and you guys work out what you're going to say tomorrow. Jeff?
Mr. Vice President, you can't attack Pat Robertson because it's sour grapes, but you finished third and your inevitability argument is doomed. What's the George why? Where are we going to make you stand now, sir?
What we're going to have to do is take out the biggest Reagan card we've got. I've been with Ronald Reagan for 7 years. I'm going to have to lay claim to his legacy. And what we're going to have to say is Iowa was an anti-Reagan state, and I'm going to have to take on Bob Dole now. There's no room here. I can't attack Robertson. You're right, Jeff. I'm going to have to take on Bob Dole. There's going to be people coalescing against Pat Robertson, Republicans up here. Ronald Reagan's my trump card. Pat Robertson, I hope I'll get the negative Pat Robertson vote, and hope.
And I would suggest, Mr. Vice President, that you have to stamp Bob Dole as the high taxer. Your only choice now, your only chance now, really, is to say, I paid the political price for my loyalty to Ronald Reagan in his least popular state. Now I want to keep the Reagan Revolution going, and you, Mr. Vice President, have to give the American people a reason why, because the other problem is the electability argument.
Yeah, that's right, but what I'm going to say is, be careful what Bob Dole says. What he said in Iowa was not pro-Reagan. He's going to come into New Hampshire, folks, and say he loves Ronald Reagan. Well, let's take a look at what he said in Iowa. It doesn't sound quite as good as it does in New Hampshire now. So what I'm going to do, Bob Dole's my target. I've got to do it because I don't have anything beyond next Tuesday.
Sounds like Jeff, it's time to get out the weather vane, gentlemen, and do the flip-flop for Bob Dole. We'll see what happens, Peter.
I was going to interrupt and ask the Bob playing the Vice President why he's not going to attack Pat Robertson.
Because I think it's dangerous. I think there's enough Republicans up there that are going to coalesce against Pat Robertson. Pat Robertson is going to put the fear of God, if you'll forgive me, into the Republicans in New Hampshire, and they're going to coalesce around either Bob Dole or me. And it's got to be me, because if I don't win New Hampshire, I'm not going to be around to go south, no matter how big my safety net is.
Okay, we'll be back to you guys later. Bob Beckel and Jeff Greenfield, thanks very much, and we'll be back in a minute after these messages.
You can see the dream of success in the eyes of people all across America. At Citicorp, we understand the dream. That's why, as Citicorp and Citibank, we've become America's largest financial services organization, already helping 1 in every 5 American families, with more home mortgages, more student loans, more MasterCard and Visa cards than any other company. We'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive.
It has the sophisticated styling of a European touring sedan and that wonderful European capability underway. Agile, precise, with room, more passenger room than any car in its class, and a 7-year, 70,000-mile protection plan. Introducing the 1988 Eagle Premier. It's well named because it's a first. An American car with European sophistication and handling.
The Olympic spirit surely must rest solely within the individual. And yet it has provided, as the centuries roll along, wonderful dignity for those who just want to try. Not necessarily win, but try.
This first segment of our broadcast is about to wrap up. Before we leave down at Republican headquarters here in Des Moines, ABC's George Will. George, some comments from you on what you've seen tonight?
I think the big story, Peter, is that 81% of the Republicans who voted tonight rejected the incumbent vice president. Furthermore, the results here are very, very bad news for Jack Kemp, who had been surging in New Hampshire, but suddenly his message is going to become muddy because you're now going to have another strong conservative in the race competing for those votes, so it's a very bad evening for him. This does raise the electability issue, and the Dole people can say George Bush, over the years, has shown himself to be an unconvincing candidate for elective office.
Okay, George, thank you very much. One observation there about Jack Kemp. A number of Iowans have gone out of their way to make the point with us that this is a state where you have to listen. And Jack Kemp gets up and does a lot of talking about the economy. David?
Well, as we have been saying, and in fact, as everyone has, this place not only chooses winners, it chooses losers, and it chose a number of them tonight. I don't think we've even mentioned Gary Hart. The last time I saw, he had something like 1%. I don't know what it is at the moment, but it's very low, so I think he's finished. Kemp is in real trouble. He may not be able to go on beyond here, may not be able to raise the money. So we have seen a little drama here tonight.
It was George Bush, of course, who in 1980 said that what you get out of Iowa is big mo for big momentum. And he certainly doesn't get it this time as he goes from here on to New Hampshire. For Bob Dole, he worked very hard on that One of Us campaign. He kept his distance from Ronald Reagan, particularly on the issue of the farm, where Ronald Reagan was not at all popular here. And in that sniping, I think, David, with George Bush over the last week particularly, it does rather look as if Mr. Bush is the one who suffered.
Well, it's also true that neither of them is very good at it. They snipe at each other, but they do it in, I think, in very awkward and clumsy ways, very, very childish and silly.
Do you believe Senator Dole when he says we're not going to hear more of it, at least from him?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I think he will hear more. Bob Dole is tough and he's smart. And I think if he is irritated and he feels George Bush is being, or anybody, perhaps not Robertson, Bush is being unfair, he will snap at him.
Okay. We will be back in about an hour from now, except on the West Coast, where we'll be on the air again after your late local news. Half an hour from now, sorry, not an hour from now. Half an hour from now, after your late local news. And at that point, we shall be emphasizing largely the Democratic story, in which we already project that Richard Gebhardt, congressman from Missouri, is going to be the winner. I'm Peter Jennings for David Brinkley. See you then.
This has been ABC News coverage of the 88 vote, brought to you by the all-new Eagle Premier from Jeep Eagle. The 88 vote and coverage of Round 1 in Iowa has been a presentation of ABC News.
Coming up on the News 24 Late Report.
The very latest by satellite from the state of Iowa on the first presidential balloting.
Voting also on the presidency here in Macon.
And the winner is a lot different than those picked in Iowa.
Jeff Batcher has the sports.
And we have Dan Schmidt's latest forecast.
Next.
On the Late Report.